In this video, I'll show you how to use a filter plugin called Velocity Filter to make all of your synth patches velocity sensitive. I've got Factory running here. This is a great synth with a lot of patches in it. I'm going to put Velocity Keyboard down below, and let's have it in MPE bass mode. And I'm going to reduce the number of rows so it fits on the screen nicely. That looks good. Put that down here. Put this up here. Okay. So Velocity Keyboard is a velocity sensitive controller, which means that when I press harder, it's sending a different MIDI velocity message with the beginning of each note that goes to Factory. Unfortunately, not all of the patches in Factory, in fact, most of the patches in Factory don't respond to velocity at all, or don't respond in the way that I'd like them to. Let's just browse through the patches a little bit. 808 punch. Let's go up an octave or two. So that has some velocity sensitivity. Seems okay. I might be able to do something else with it, but that's quite nicely sensitive. Let's see what this is. This one isn't doing very much as I press harder. So I'm getting some velocity sensitivity on all of these, but it's perhaps not as much as I want. So I'm gonna kick in the velocity filter now. So you should note that when I put the velocity filter on, I have to set. You see this symbol here is the same one that's on the main synth. So I have the main synth taking MIDI from Velocity Keyboard, and I'll also need Velocity Filter to take MIDI from Velocity Keyboard so that it knows what velocity these notes are playing at it, and that's how it's going to know to be able to do this filtering. So now I'm getting a lot more variation with the changes in velocity than what I was getting before. Listen to this. I'll take it off, and I'll put it back on. I need to adjust some settings in here. Let's put this velocity response curve here. And I'm going to adjust my velocity response curve in here too. This is a little too high, and let's take that velocity output range so I get the full range. That sounds pretty good. Okay, let's talk about what's happening here. So this is a filter that varies the filter coefficients according to the MIDI velocity that's coming in. So every time I press a note on Velocity Keyboard, it's going to send a start note message along with a MIDI velocity. And that MIDI velocity is going to control the filter somewhere between this range that I'm setting here. So the L is the lower limit and the U is the upper limit. And I usually just leave U flat, which means that whatever the original sound of the synth was, when I play Velocity 127, I'll leave that alone. If I want to increase the dynamics of the sound by making the loudest MIDI notes boosted in volume, I can pull U up and it will boost. Now between the L and the U, you see this third line, and that's the current state of the filter. So if I press softly, you'll see the filter drops down toward the L line, and as I press harder, it starts to creep up. This Velocity Keyboard works much better if you have something soft behind the iPad, or the best is if you hold it in your hand. So you can see as I play harder, I'm getting louder notes. I'm still not totally happy with this velocity response. Let me see what I get there. So this is too much of soft notes. Let's put it in the center and see what I got. Yeah, that's more natural. I want it to feel like I really have control over it between between the entire range from the lower to the upper limit. Let's talk about what this F does. So I think the easiest way to understand this is let's put F all the way to the left side. And when we do, the filters turn off, and what we get is just a MIDI controlled volume adjustment. So at the bottom, I have the lowest volume. And when I hit it hard, I'm getting the highest volume. Now to me, this is 43 decibels of dynamic range. That sounds like a little bit too much to my ears. So I'm going to take it down to about 25 decibels range. And that's a standard MIDI controlled volume, like a volume knob. But this is, to me, sounds really unsatisfying. And the reason that it's unsatisfying is that any physical object that you would hit or strike or any kind of musical instrument that we have in the physical world doesn't just change volume when you hit it harder or softer, but it also changes the tone. And specifically what usually happens is as you hit something harder, you're going to get more high frequencies. And as you hit it softer, the high frequencies will be much less, whereas the low frequencies might only be slightly different. So that's why it's really helpful to have a filter as opposed to just a volume control. So I'm gonna create a big dynamic range, 53 dB of difference in the high frequencies, but at the low frequencies, this filter only shows us down to about 800 hertz. But down in the really low frequencies that you don't see on the screen, there's almost no change going on in the volume between the softest note and the loudest note, which means that as you listen to this, this sounds a lot more realistic than this does when I put that back to volume mode. This really sounds like an electronic volume adjustment, where this, it's still a synthesizer sound, but it sounds natural. It sounds like what you would expect if you were hitting some kind of string, plucking a string or hitting a mallet, something like that. So I'm going to close that down. So this works with any synth. We can take velocity factory out, and let's run it with Xeon instead. I'm going to make sure I'm in the right MIDI mode for Xeon. Xeon doesn't do MPE. So I'm going to go to single channel legato and close that down and put velocity keyboard as a MIDI input. No, I'm not hearing the same level of dynamic range that I was in the factory, and that's because the cutoff here is quite low, which means there isn't a lot of high frequency content for me to filter. So I'm going to take the cutoff up a little bit. And now it's sounding better. But there's something kind of strange that's happening that I noticed. If I play a really loud note and I play a soft note, you hear you hear a click as the filter clamps down. So let's look at what this looks like on the filter graph. Here's the loud note. So it's right up at the, you're not seeing it, but it's right up at the U point now. And when I play softly, it jumps down to the L. The problem is that this one effect is processing MIDI and audio at the same time. And often the host app is going to get the MIDI signal here after the audio has already started processing, which means that the filter will be late in closing down to that low velocity setting, which means that the attack part of the note will be processed at the high velocity, even though I just switched down to a low velocity. I hope that makes sense. Let's listen to it again. So if I play a bunch of notes at high velocity, that works fine. And I play a bunch of notes at low velocity, that works fine, but at the moment you switch between high and low, there can be a little bit of lag where the filter takes some time to get up there. And that may mean that for certain sounds you can't use this effect, but often what you can do to make it work better is just take the attack time up a little bit so that the synth sound isn't having a hard clicking noise at the beginning. And And by just giving it a few milliseconds of fading in, it gives the filter a little bit of time so that it can react and not have that. You still hear on the first note when you go from loud to soft, there's a little bit of something going on, but now it's very manageable. A little womp as it closes down, but it's not unpleasant, and I think you could work with this musically. I'm going to stop there. So you can apply this filter to any synth that you can run as an audio unit. You're going to be able to put this filter on it. The only there's one caveat, is that it doesn't work with GarageBand, and we haven't been able to get it to work with GarageBand because we can't get GarageBand to send MIDI into an audio unit effect. It's like in GarageBand we're having support for MIDI effects and audio effects, but not for effects that process MIDI and audio at the same time. So it's not working in GarageBand, but it is working in BeatMaker 3, in Cubasis, in Aria, in AUM, in Audio Bus. So that brings us to the end of this tutorial. If you enjoyed this and you'd like to see more similar videos, consider clicking the subscribe button so that next time we release a video on this channel, YouTube will prioritize it in your video feed.